Erie, Pennsylvania, August 28, 2003. A small city in the northwest of Pennsylvania, on the shores of Lake Erie, a middle-class community of quiet streets and familiar faces, where serious violence was the exception, not the rule. The kind of place that rarely made national headlines. That summer changed everything. Brian was dead. The ordinary walking the most diabolical crime. An ordinary man. Those who knew Brian Wells always painted the same picture. A middle-aged man with no criminal history, no apparent conflicts, no known enemies. A pizza delivery driver for years, he navigated the same streets, the same addresses, the same routine. Every week, without exception, he set aside time to take his mother out for a walk. At home, he cared for a collection of cats he had accumulated over the years. On the surface, there was nothing that set him apart from thousands of other men in cities like Erie. That August afternoon, he left for another pizza delivery. It was an afternoon like any other, until the moment it wasn't. The bank. In the early afternoon, Brian Wells walked into a bank branch in Summit Township carrying two objects, what appeared to be an ordinary walking cane and a handwritten note. The note was not a straightforward demand. It was a detailed document with specific instructions directed at the bank teller, a step-by-step script she was expected to follow. The language was elaborate, carefully constructed not to read as a simple threat, but to guide the situation in a precise and controlled manner. Brian left the branch with a sum of money and was intercepted by police minutes later in a nearby parking lot before he could move far from the area. But what immediately drew the attention of every officer who approached was not the money, it was the metallic device locked around his neck. A collar of metal pipes, wires, and articulated latches, heavy and visibly built with some degree of technical complexity. The parking lot. Brian's behavior in that parking lot was the first element that unsettled investigators. He was calm, sitting on the asphalt, surrounded by officers with weapons drawn. Brian displayed a composure that made no sense given the circumstances. He explained that he had received a letter with instructions on how to disarm the device and that he needed to complete certain steps for that to happen. His demeanor was that of someone who does not believe the danger is real, or who still trusts that everything will unfold as planned. That composure lasted until the moment the device began showing signs of activation. The shift was immediate. Brian went from a disconcerting calm to visible desperation, pleading to be saved, looking at the officers around him with the expression of someone who had finally understood the gravity of what was happening. The bomb squad had been dispatched, but the concentration of police vehicles surrounding the parking lot had created a blockage that delayed the arrival of the specialists. The time needed for an effective intervention simply no longer existed. The bomb detonated. The officers, still in confrontation positions, kept their weapons pointed at the body for several minutes after the explosion. It was only after some time that they approached to check on the condition of the victim. Brian Wells was dead. The FBI would later classify the case in the investigations that followed as one of the most diabolical crimes the agency had ever encountered. What the bomb concealed. In the weeks that followed, forensic experts began dismantling every element of the crime, and what they found completely altered the understanding of the case. The cane Brian had carried during the robbery was sent to analysis. The result was revealing. The object was, in fact, a handcrafted shotgun, meticulously disguised in the form of an ordinary walking cane, a functional weapon engineered to go unnoticed. But the bomb was the element that disturbed investigators the most. When the device was reconstructed piece by piece by the forensic team, what they found was a deliberately deceptive structure. A large portion of the components served no real technical function. The interior of the mechanism was a labyrinth of wires, codes, objects, and false connections, designed not to ensure the bomb's operation, but to make any attempt to disarm it practically impossible. Anyone following the instructions in the letter would be navigating a system built to confuse, not to be solved. There was still one detail more disturbing than all the others. After calculating the bomb's detonation time, the experts concluded that even if Brian had followed every step of the instructions correctly and without error, the available time would have been insufficient. The letter that promised a way out was not a real way out. Whoever had built that device knew from the very beginning that Brian Wells would never reach the end of the instructions. The phone call. For weeks, the investigation moved without clear direction. No identified suspects, no concrete leads about who had planned the crime. Then, without warning, a man contacted the police. His name was Bill Rothstein, and he was calling to report the existence of a body inside a freezer in his own home, located on the same street where Brian made his last pizza delivery that August day. Bill indicated that the person responsible for the body was a woman named Marjorie Deal Armstrong, and the victim was believed to be a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend of hers. When the investigators arrived at the address, they found Marjorie inside the house. In the freezer, a human body curled in a fetal position. The victim was identified as James Rotten, Marjorie's companion of more than 10 years. The circle. What followed was the slow and methodical unraveling of the entire initial version of the crime. Bill Rothstein confessed to having been part of the plan from the beginning. According to the investigation, he was believed to be the one responsible for building the device. The decision to confess, according to Bill himself, had a specific motivation. He had terminal cancer and wanted to set things right before he died. An acquaintance of Marjorie's named Ken Barnes, when pressed by investigators, admitted that the group regularly met at Bill's house to discuss and develop the robbery plan. Attending those meetings were Bill Rothstein, Ken Barnes, Marjorie Deal Armstrong, and Brian Wells himself. The image of the completely innocent and coerced victim began to fall apart. Brian knew about the plan. He had agreed to participate. The original logic of the scheme was that the device around his neck would be fake, an elaborate piece of theater designed to intimidate the bank and ensure the money would be handed over without resistance. That was what he believed. James Rotten had taken part in the discussions as well, but at some point, faced with the weight of what was being planned, he threatened to reveal everything to the authorities. Marjorie responded by killing him and locking the body in Bill's freezer, where it remained while the group determined its next steps.
The outcome. On October 15, 2010, 7 years after Brian Wells died in a parking lot in Erie, Marjorie Deal Armstrong was formally sentenced. The sentence was life in prison. Bill Rothstein died of cancer before formally facing justice. Ken Barnes cooperated with the prosecution and received a reduced sentence. James Roten was buried. And Brian Wells, the pizza delivery driver who left for an ordinary delivery on a summer afternoon, remained the face of one of the most elaborately cruel crimes ever recorded in American legal history.